Hey everyone, this is Kevin with Divinely Designed, and we have a soap video today. This is probably going to be a longer video. This soap that I'm making is sort of a project, a big soap project, that I'm going to do for Amy's Soap Challenge for the month of September. Now Amy's Soap Challenge this month is about piping flowers using soap. So, and they mentioned using the Russian piping tips if you're familiar with those. They're a little bit different than normal piping tips that you would use in cake decorating. They sort of automatically make flowers. And I do have a Russian piping tip that I'll be making some with later on in this video. But I'm also going to be doing some regular piped flowers like you would do using buttercream. So I'll just be using regular tips as well. But the soap challenge itself is about piping flowers. So what I thought I would do for this challenge is to make a wedding cake version of of soap, right? So I'm going to be making sort of a layered cake, just like you would have for a wedding cake, and then be putting some flowers on it that I'll be piping for the decoration. So the whole thing is, once it's all finished, is what I'll be using for the challenge itself. But there are many stages to this project. So you can see here I have sort of my oils and lye water sort of separated out. What I did was make one big batch of soap, and then I've sort of guessed at how much I'm going to need for each different section and divided them all out, so I'm all sort of prepped and ready to go. Let me go over the recipe, but the recipe isn't so much important here, but it'll be down below in the Show More section, but just for informational purposes, if you're interested in what the recipe I used here was. For the whole recipe, not divided up, but for the whole thing, okay? 1,260 grams of olive oil, 1,080 grams of coconut oil 76 degree, 540 grams of sweet almond oil, 540 grams of shea butter, 180 grams of castor oil, 1,368 grams of water, and 509 grams of lye. Now what I did was took that entire recipe once it was all together and sort of decided I'm going to need a quarter of it to do the cake layers, and a quarter of it to do the icing, and an eighth of it to do these flowers, right? So I sort of divided it all up, and that's what you see here. So these larger ones are a quarter of that recipe, so this is 3/4 of the recipe, and these smaller ones are 1/8 of the recipe, so together they are another quarter. So this portion over here is going to be for the cake layers themselves, and that's what I'm going to be working on first. And you can sort of see down below here I have sort of prepped. I'm using some 6-inch cake pans that I've just lined with saran wrap, that I'll be doing 3 of those to get 3 6-inch layers. And then I purchased a silicone mold that has 4-inch round layers on it that are just about, I think they're 1 inch thick, so they're the perfect size. If I could have found a 6-inch silicone mold like this, I would have purchased it, but I didn't have one. And I want to do sort of a larger layer on the bottom and then a smaller layer on top to make it look like a wedding cake. So we'll be doing different layers. So that's what this portion is over here. This next portion will be for piped flowers. I'll be dividing it up into several different colors and doing some different flowers that I'm going to pipe separately, not on the cake itself, but pipe separately and let them firm up, and then I'll be attaching them to the cake later on. This next portion will be for the icing that's going to go in between the layers. It's just going to be white. The one smaller portion will be specifically for the Russian piped flowers using the Russian piping tip. And then the other smaller mixture here, or smaller amount here, will be doing for doing some leaves and for then gluing the finalized flowers onto the cake itself. I may also do a little bit of piping of some flowers directly on the cake once it's all together to sort of balance it and fill it out, okay? That's the overall project. This video is probably it would be super long if I filmed everything, but I'm gonna try and film each piece, but it's probably just gonna be short little sections of each one. But that's sort of the goal for the project itself. Just to give you a hint, kind of this is the color scheme I'd like to go for on my flowers. The cake itself is just going to be, you know, like a cake color. And if you are familiar with sort of the trend in cakes today called naked cakes, that's kind of what I'm going for. It's where you don't really ice the entire cake. You can see the individual layers of the cake themselves, you know, with icing in between, but the layers of the cake themselves are naked, right? Okay, so that's kind of what I'm going for. But the color scheme for my flowers is definitely going to be kind of in this pink range. I'll be piping some and using the Russian piping tips. I might also throw in a little bit of yellow for the centers of flowers and to give a little bit of contrast. And for more contrast sort of within the flowers, I'm going to be using a little bit of blue to sort of mix it with the pinks that are in there. And then green, obviously, for some of the leaves that will be in the soap as well. Okay? So that is the plan. Stick with me, and the first portion of this video will be covering making the cake layers themselves. Okay, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, I decided to do a voiceover for this video because it would be incredibly long. So I'm starting out here with the first part of the project, which was making the bases for the cake itself. I tried to do kind of a custom color here with some Cappuccino from Celestial Colors, Vibrance Orange from Nurture's Soap Supply, and Sister Golden Hair Surprise from Mad Oils. I actually did fragrance it also with buttercream frosting from Nature's Garden. But really all I did here was mix up the soap, add the fragrance, sort of play with the color, and then add it to my different layers here. Now I actually am using cake pans that I've lined with saran wrap. If I did this again, I think I would line them with parchment paper. It did create some crinkles, which I'll deal with later, but they weren't that bad. The next part here, I'm moving on to piping using the Russian piping tip. If you've never used the Russian piping tip, they're really big tips, so they don't fit sort of normal couplers. But my plan was to use the Russian piping tip with some pinks, moving from a really, from a kind of pale pink to a bright medium pink, and then a really dark shade. Now I used Mad Oil micas to make my different pinks. The really dark shade I combined some Voodo mica with some Key West blue and a little bit of black to make that really deep shade. Now what I'm doing is layering the different soap colors on some saran wrap, which I'm going to then roll up into sort of a cigar. But the problem I did was I made the layer a little bit too thick here, so when I go to roll it up, it doesn't roll really well. I should have left it a little bit thinner. It worked okay, but I would have been better if I would have made those layers just a little bit thinner. So rolled it up in some saran wrap, cut off the one end, and then put the whole thing into a piping bag, and then started piping. Now, I found, you know, this first attempt here, it was just too loose. I had to give it more time to firm up, so I just took that soap off and put it back in a container. And I'm going to end up using the darker purple to do some mums that I'm going to pipe. The darker purple kind of firmed up a little bit quicker, so while I'm letting that Russian piping tip soap that's in the bag sort of firm up, I moved on to piping some of sort of chrysanthemum-like flowers. And I love the color that I created here with the sort of the pink and blue and a little bit of black. It's this really just lovely, deep
deep sort of purple pink. So here I'm using, and you know what, I'll try to put the numbers of the tips down below so that you can see them, but I'm using a flower nail and little pieces of parchment paper here. I just pipe a center, and then off of that center circle, I'm just piping off multiple little leaves, and this is a special little tip that is curved. It looks like sort of like the letter C, if the letter C were on its back, and it gives a very nice shape to the petals. Now my hand's kind of in the way, but in just a second I'll try to do a little bit of a close-up so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I have this sped up so it looks like I'm super fast at piping, and I am totally not. I am super slow at piping, so speeding up the video is kind of funny, but here's a little close-up. All right, so pipe the center, and then you're just piping different little leaves off. You start at the outermost edge and then move in one layer. And you could do 3 or 4 sort of layers depending on the size that you want. And I love the look of these. I mean, they look totally great. Went back to trying to pipe, and it was still a little loose. But part of the trick also with using these Russian piping tips is getting the pressure right. You have to sort of press it to the paper and pull up, and you have to release the pressure at a certain time. So it takes a while to get the hang of, using these tips. I did switch off to a different Russian piping tip. It's the same tip, but just a smaller version of it. So I tried some smaller bud ones. So I piped these in various sizes. Some of them looked better than others. But you'll notice I'm piping these all on a separate sheet, which I'm just going to put to the side so they can firm up. Now I'm moving on to a flower that is done in the style of a ranunculus. And you start off by piping sort of these little strips, 4 of them sort of in a square. And then you just pipe little arches sort of overlapping those other layers that you just did. And you just keep doing that in layers, making it bigger and bigger each time. These are really simple flowers. I think they look really great. And as you move to the outer portion of the flower, you move the tip of your piping tip a little bit either straighter or even backwards to make the petals sort of flare out. And I think they're super easy to pipe, and they come out looking great. So that was, I'm doing those in sort of a pink color here. And now I'm moving on, oh no, those were done in a coral color. I'm moving on here to pink, and this is actually a rose. So you start by piping kind of a blob in the middle. Then you do a little wrap around to make the very center of your bud. And I follow kind of a classic style, so I do 3 petals in the center, and then I do 5 on the next layer. And after that, I'll do 6 or 7, sort of depending on the shape and size of the rose itself. And again, as you move to those outer layers, you turn your tip of your petal outward so you get more flaring on the petals. And you could stop after 3 petals just to do a bud or 2. All right, here's me assembling the cake layers. So I have the layers. Now, you'll notice that I'm putting some just scraps of soap on top of the first layer there, and that's because I need support. I'm going to pipe some. This is sort of the icing, right, the white part, but that's not going to support the layers themselves. It would just squish out. So I actually have some scraps of soap that I put in between the layers so that I can then pipe the icing in between. Now again, I'm going for this kind of trend within the cake world called a naked cake. And it's, where you can see the icing between the layers, but the cake itself is still visible. And you'll notice it's a little hard to see here probably, but the outer layers do have a texture on them. And in the earliest part of this portion of the video, you saw me hold up kind of a white cylinder. That's actually a cake decorating tool used for fondant to give it kind of a burlap appearance, and I used that on the edges of the cake to make it look like real cake. Here I'm moving on to the smaller top portion. So the bottom portion are 6-inch rounds, and this top portion is, they are 4-inch rounds, but I'm doing the same thing, just sort of putting some support down, then piping the soap in between, the white soap in between the layers, and you'll see I'm sort of using a knife here to scrape it off. Again, you kind of want, it's sort of a rustic look, but it's also really kind of neat in appearance. So it's okay that I got some of the white soap kind of on the sides, and you'll see maybe a little bit later on there's like little smears that got onto the cake itself, but the icing, the sort of portion of the icing does look pretty smooth. And that's great. If you go Google some naked cake images, you'll see what I mean. It's sort of like they're rustic and they have little imperfections in them. But okay, I mixed up some sort of very pale pink soap also, and that's what I'm going to be using for the glue. So I'll be piping dollops of wet pink soap in order to place the flowers. Now this first one you notice me place, I didn't show me piping, and that's because I actually piped it directly onto the sheet itself. And this was a flower I was doing more in the style of a peony. I really love peonies. I have a hard time piping them in buttercream, and it was even harder to do in soap. But that was, you'll see a couple of them in there that are kind of in a coral color and also in a really dark kind of raspberry color. But otherwise, I'm just piping this wet soap and placing the flowers, kind of looking at placement, trying to, make it a nice looking arrangement so I don't have too many of the same color sort of next to each other. On that second layer, in the middle, you can see sort of that dark purple peony, and to the right, I have some of those Russian piped buds, and then I have that really dark purpley mum in there. I love that color. That's that dark purpley in this mix of pinks. I think it just adds so much to it. But again, just adding here, I wanted to try and feature the Russian sort of piped buds on the second layer. So I have a bunch of them sort of clustered in groups of 3s there. Once I did all the placement of the flowers, I moved on to putting in some leaves, and I'm just trying to, find some gaps in the flowers that I can use leaves to kind of fill it up to make it look fuller. I am using a leaf piping tip here. This was a mixture of Mad Oil's Maniacal Pea and Tennis Ball Yellow, I think, to make it a nice bright green. And then after the leaves, I'm going to go in and make little tiny buds. And all you do is just pipe little balls of green. And then I'm going to use the pink and sort of insert the tip of the pink into the little globes of green. And you pipe the pink into the green, and it'll sort of push the green outward and then make it look like a little flower bud. It's super easy, and it just gives you this fantastic effect. They just look so good. And I love doing them in buttercream, but it worked really well for soap here too. So, and that's it. Here's a bunch of still photos. Again, I think I was really successful with that kind of naked cake look. I did take some glitter and some cosmetic glitter and mix it in a little bit of oil, and then applied it with a paintbrush, and you can see those sparkles here. On some of the flowers as it catches the light. I think it did a really good job of just making the flowers nice and shimmery. I didn't use it on the leaves or on the little buds there. So that's pretty much it. This is for Amy's soap challenge. I hope you enjoyed the video. And comments, questions, leave them below. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. Have a great day.